At my content on YouTube. Granted, it's not nearly as robust as what I have on TikTok, but I'm genuinely making a push to make this YouTube my primary platform to tell my stories on. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to try to do at least one, or I am going to do at least one video on YouTube a week, if not two. And as I get, frankly, better at creating the videos, I will try to do more as well. So please subscribe, turn on notifications. I'd really appreciate it. So today we're going to be covering the disappearance of Lars Mittank. So this particular case is not new. It's been covered a ton on YouTube, on Reddit. I mean, it's everywhere. But the reason it's so popular, or I should say it's drawing so much interest, is because there's this fascinating video that goes with the case. Basically, Lars, who disappears, we see his final moments on a closed circuit TV camera at an airport, and there's multiple camera angles. It's right in front of you. It's not hard to see what he's doing. There's multiple witnesses. There's so much information around kind of what led up to this, from doctors, from his friends, and then there's this video. Like, there's just so much information, and no one knows what happened or where he is. So let's dive in. On June 30th, 2014, Lars Mittank and 4 of his friends, these guys are all in their 20s, they left northern Germany, where they were all from. They lived, they worked there, and made their way to Bulgaria. They were staying at a very popular seaside resort called the Golden Sands, and they were just gonna have a nice vacation, a nice week-long vacation. They get there, they check into their hotel, and promptly begin to relax. And everything is going great. They're, going to the clubs, they're going to the beach, they're eating good food. I mean, it's going the way they had hoped it would go until the end of the trip. So on one of the last days of their trip, July 6th, Lars is at a local bar, and they're watching a soccer game. And something happens where Lars basically voices his interest in one team, and the locals that were in the bar, they were supporting the other team. And so they start, arguing, but it escalates really quickly. It turned into a full-blown thing. His friends come in, they pull him out. There was no physical violence in the bar. It was just an altercation that could have gone to blows, but it didn't. Later that night, Lars and his friends, they're getting ready to shut it down for the night, and they go to a McDonald's. And so Lars doesn't want to go in, so he stays outside, and his 4 friends go in to get some food. When they come out, Lars is gone. And so they're sitting around waiting for him, and he's nowhere to be found. And they say, okay, well, maybe, he went back to the hotel. Perhaps he just wanted to crash early. So they go back to the hotel, and he's not there. And so they kind of are faced with this decision of like, well, what do we do? And they're like, well, he's an adult. I'm sure he's fine, and I bet he'll turn up soon. So they just kind of write it off and say, Lars will come back. And so they go to bed. When they get up, Lars had returned, and he had this kind of bizarre story about why he was missing. He said that this group of men who he thought were either Russian or locals, so Bulgarians, had attacked him, and he was convinced that they had been sent after him by the people he had been fighting with in the bar over that soccer game, that they had kind of ordered a hit on Lars. And that was his whole story. And so, his friends are looking at him and they're like, why did you leave? If you had been fighting with them, wouldn't it have occurred like right outside the McDonald's and we would have come out and found you? Like, you had to have gone somewhere for this to happen, or they had to like entice you to go somewhere to leave the McDonald's. And then like, how long did this attack take? Because this is like, midnight, let's say they're at McDonald's and you're not back at the hotel for, 4, 5, 6 hours. Like, the time didn't make any sense. But ultimately, they kind of decided that, what, Lars just had a weird night. He's back now. He is safe. So let's just write it off. He was attacked, but we're leaving here today anyways. Lars said that he got hit in the ear during the scuffle with these 4 assailants. And so just to be safe, they said, Lars, you should go to the doctor. You should just get it looked at before we fly home. So Lars goes to a doctor who examines him, and he looks in his ear, and it turns out Lars has a perforated eardrum. And, at first, the doctor actually suggested surgery, which Lars refused. He didn't want to do surgery in Bulgaria. If he was going to do surgery, he would have done it back home in Germany. And he instead goes for the antibiotic that this doctor prescribes him, which is called Cefuroxime. So here's an image of it. You can see it for yourself. So he gets this antibiotic, and the doctor tells him that, flying, because he was scheduled to fly home with his friends back to Germany that night, flying could be problematic for someone with a perforated eardrum, because the change in air pressure as you're flying could potentially make the damage to your ear worse. And so the doctor suggested that you don't fly home with your friends tonight. Instead, you delay your trip home a couple of days, and you just kind of let your ear, I guess, recover a little bit before you fly home. So Lars goes back and he tells his friends what's going on with his ear and what the doctor said. And their first thought is, well, we'll stay with you. We'll stay here with you. We'll all delay our flights, and we'll fly home together in a couple of days. But Lars was adamant. Maybe he was just trying to be a good friend and not make them worry. He just said, look, I'm going to be totally fine. You guys take your scheduled flight tonight. Go home. I'm fine. I'll get a cheap hotel. I'll stay here for a couple of days, and then I'll make my way home. It's not a big deal. So Lars and his 4 friends, they take off for the airport. His friends go into the airport and fly home to Germany. And Lars goes to look for a hotel near the airport because he's only going to be delaying his trip a couple of days. And he'd rather just be close to the airport. So he finds this cheap hotel called the Hotel Color. And so this is really where Lars's behavior starts becoming totally bizarre. So around midnight, Lars calls his mother and he tells her that she needs to turn off all of his bank cards. Like, shut off my credit card, shut off my debit card, turn them all off. And she's confused, right? Like, she's trying to make sense of what he's saying, but there wasn't really a good reason for why he was saying this. And then he hangs up. And so she's kind of left with what's going on. Then at 3 a.m., so a few hours later, he calls her back. And now he's whispering. And he's clearly terrified. In fact, Sandra Matank, his mother, would later in an interview after this whole case really blew up, would say to a German TV station that through the phone, she could tell that her son was terrified. This was not an act. This was like, he is terrified. He's fearing for his life. But he calls her at 3 and he's like, there is a group of men trying to attack me. They're gonna kill me. And he was 100% convinced of it. She, Sandra, would later say that she wished that she had asked more questions of her son. But this behavior was so uncharacteristic of him that I think his mother just kind of was like, okay, we're gonna get through the night. I'll talk to my son tomorrow. He's coming home tomorrow anyways. But that didn't happen. So finally, after that phone call at 3, he texts his mother a little bit after that, asking her about the antibiotic he's been prescribed. And he's asking her what it is. He's listing the name, which again is Cefuroxime 500. And he's asking her about it like he has no idea what it is. And she's like, that's a very commonly prescribed antibiotic that lots of people prescribe. They gave it to you. Investigators would later speak to staff at the hotel and they would review the hotel's footage, their CCTV footage. And between the first phone call to his mother at midnight and the phone call at 3 a.m., Lars had actually been pacing the halls at around 1 a.m. He'd been pacing up and down the halls and he was ducking into an elevator and hiding. And then at some point he had left for about an hour and then came back and no one knows where he went. At 6 a.m., Lars was dropped off at the airport via a taxi, and investigators would speak to the person who rode that taxi with Lars, and they would say that he seemed a bit off. They said that his pupils were very dilated. He gets to the airport and he texts his mother that he's arrived at the terminal. At this point, his mother confirmed that his flight had been booked, and she suggested to him that he should go talk to the airport doctor and just get his ear looked at one more time before he flies home. And I think on some level, she just wanted a health professional to see her son, just because the behavior he had shown over the past, 12 hours was just totally out of character. The CCTV cameras capture Lars walking into the airport, seeing this doctor, and then I'll get into what actually happens. So on camera, and you're gonna see it in a minute, Lars goes into the airport. So his mother's told him that he needs to go see a doctor, and he does that. He walks over to where the doctor is, and he goes inside. Everything seems totally normal. That doctor would say that he was pleasant, but as he was being examined, the doctor looked in his ear and said, "Yep, everything looks okay. You can fly home." But the doctor would say that it was clear that Lars he was paranoid about something. The doctor didn't know what it was. He has no context. But he could tell that something was going on. He was fidgety, he was a little bit nervous. And then when a construction worker came into the to the doctor's office, he had on a construction, bright, reflective vest. They were doing some renovations inside of the airport, so this is fairly normal. And apparently this construction worker, was actually working on the doctor's office, and he stepped in to maybe ask a quick question. Lars sees this construction worker, and this is actually, I think this is off camera. You see that he's in the office, but you don't see this interaction. And something happens where, this guy triggers a full-fledged flight response, where Lars drops everything he has, leaves his luggage, and starts yelling, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die," and sprints out of the airport. This is all on camera. You're going to see it in a second. And he leaves the airport. He's just kind of looking around. He doesn't really know what he's doing. And he kind of like jogs his way across the parking lot. And he gets to a big barbed wire fence, instantly scales it. The barbed wires don't seem to affect him. And he disappears into the woods, never to be seen again. So since his disappearance, there's only been, one unvalidated sighting of him. It was a year later by a trucker who really didn't have much information about him. He just said that he picked up a guy that was like barefoot walking on the road, who later on, this truck driver would look at the news or something and would say, "Oh, that looks like Lars Matank." But that's unconfirmed. Other than that, we have no idea what happened to him. A couple theories about what might have happened. The first one is that perhaps there was a side effect of this antibiotic that he was given by this doctor in Bulgaria. But there's a couple huge issues with this. The first one being Lars never filled his prescription. The doctor, when he went to the airport, was able to see his records, and he had not filled it. So he didn't have the antibiotic. But even if he had, this is one of the most commonly prescribed antibiotics that, the percentage of people that have any sort of side effect it's like less than 1%. So it's possible, but he never filled his prescription. So that seems like that's kind of out the window. The other is, especially if you look at the mydriasis that he was experiencing in the taxi cab with the highly dilated pupils, the hit to the head, he's this ruptured eardrum, that perhaps he suffered like a traumatic brain injury, like a concussion, that was leading to somewhat erratic behavior. And I'm by no means claim to be a medical professional, but typically if you see side effects of a head injury, it doesn't present itself immediately and like super aggressively. It's usually over the course of time, your behavior changes, or at least a couple days later they present. It's very rare that you would be struck on the head and be a totally different person, but it is possible. Another theory is that even though Lars did not have a history of mental health issues, and neither did anybody else in his family, that the fight he got into where he was attacked could have triggered some sort of psychotic break that was so stressful that he lost his mind. That is certainly possible too. So weeks turned into months, turned into years, and despite the unvalidated sighting, no one has any idea where Lars is. He was an outdoor enthusiast. He was definitely competent in the outdoors, not like a survivalist or something, but he definitely was not out of his element out in the wilderness. And so some thought perhaps he just wanted to start a new life, and he ran off into the woods and was living it out there. But the family, the Matank family, they hired a private investigator. They pulled out all the stops to scour the area and look for him, but there's no signs that anybody is like living in the immediate proximity to the airport in the wilderness there, and there's no body, there's no anything. He's just gone. I hope one day they're able to find Lars, for better or worse, just closure for his family. So that's going to do it. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments about what happened to Lars and where you think he might be. What do you think might have caused this? Please let me know. I'm going to be posting at least one of these types of stories, these kind of interesting true crime, scary kind of stories on YouTube going forward. So I'd love it if you subscribed and turned on notifications. Also, please follow me on TikTok. My handle is MrBallen. I tell a story almost every day on that channel. Also, I'm on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. You can DM me there. I'd love to chat with you there. And that's going to do it, guys. Thank you so much for your support. Very low, admittedly. I'm pretty good at TikTok. I'm pretty bad at YouTube, but I'm going to get better. I would also love it if you guys have suggestions for videos that you pass them my way, either in the comments of the video, or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. So JohnBallen416. Shoot me a DM, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So today we're going to talk about one of the more well-known unsolved mysteries, and it is the very strange disappearance of two college students from the Netherlands who go to Panama, and they've saved up all this money to go on this trip. Like, they were working in a cafe for the 6 months leading up to this trip that they were going to finance mostly themselves. They had mapped out all these different places they're going to go in Panama. It was going to be like part vacation, part like mission trip, where they were going to be helping out with different charities in the different villages they go to, but also enjoying the travel. These girls were very close. They were highly intelligent. They were just wonderful, smart people, and they were really excited about this trip. And they go to Panama, and the first couple weeks go without incident. And at some point, things take a very significant turn for the worst. And so let's dive in. On March 15th, 2014, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Vroon, who were both Dutch college students, head to Panama for a 6-week-long part vacation, part charitable giving trip. They had mapped out these 6 weeks really diligently. They planned to do lots of traveling and exploring, and then also they were going to be working with different charities along the way as they went all over Panama. And they were really excited about it. They had even worked for the 6 months leading up to this trip at a cafe to raise additional money for this trip. So March 15th, they arrive in Panama. The first 2 weeks they're there go beautifully. They do some traveling, they're working with different charities, and everything's going to plan. And then by the second week, they arrive in a little town called Boquete, and they stay at this hostel. So that's like a group living situation. It's pretty common amongst travelers all over the world, where to save money, you'll crash at these almost like dorms where other travelers and people will stay in the same room as you. 2 weeks in, they're in Boquete and they're living in this hostel. So on April 1st, they're in Boquete, and they want to go on this fairly significant hike, which is going to be around this massive volcano called the Baru volcano. Up near, I guess, the summit of the volcano, there was this amazing overlook where if you climbed up to it, you could get a beautiful 360-degree view of the entire area. Vroon and Kremers decide they want to go hike up to that overlook. They were experienced hikers, but realistically, I don't think they were taking this hike particularly seriously. It was a hike that was traditionally a guided hike, meaning usually you went and did this with a local who could make sure you didn't leave the path or, fall where you didn't know there was a cliff or something. They opt to do this on their own. So they head out, and they bring the hostel owner had a dog, and they decide to bring that dog along with them. It was a very friendly dog. So Kremers, Vroon, and the dog head off for this hike up this volcano. They had a digital camera with them, in addition to water, and they had their phones. They had all the different kind of basic supplies. They had a camera, and so this is important because they take a bunch of pictures as they begin this journey. So that night, the dog returns to the hostel, but the girls aren't with the dog, and so this alerts the owners of the hostel. But they search the area, I guess the immediate area, for the girls. They can't find them, and they decide, we'll just wait until the morning and see if they turn up. The next morning, they don't turn up. Additionally, the parents of the girls, they were used to getting very regular text messages from these girls to kind of let them know that everything was okay. And the text messages stopped. And so that alerted the parents as well by the second day after they've gone missing. And so authorities are alerted. Search crews were organized on foot for the first day. So April 2nd, there are search crews all over the place looking for these girls. Can't find anything. The next day, they set up aerial search teams. They're scouring the jungle looking for signs of these girls. No sign of them. The search continues, and then on April 6th, the parents of Kremers and Froon, they arrive in Panama. They immediately offer a $30,000 reward for any information about their daughters, which is a ton of money in Panama. It's roughly equivalent to about $500,000 in a developed country. I mean, with 30,000 US dollars in Panama, I mean, you could buy land, you could buy a house, you could start a business. I mean, this is big money. And considering many people, especially in that area, were day laborers that were working for like less than $10 a day. I mean, you would think that that type of reward for just information about these girls would incite hundreds of people to just on their own go looking for these girls. And if you consider too that, I mean, this is a small town. I mean, news travels fast. You know, this is the area they probably grew up in. They know the area really well. The idea that with an amazing incentive, the financial incentive, and just the fact that they know this area really, really well, it was odd that nothing was turning up. There were no leads coming in. 3 months go by and there is not a sign of these girls anywhere. They have vanished. There's no leads. Nothing's been found. Obviously at this point, the family and investigators at this point have pretty much accepted that they're probably deceased at this point, but they're looking for them. They want to know what happened. And a local woman finds Froon's backpack, her blue backpack, 5 miles away from where the girls were supposedly hiking, or where they had intended to hike. Navigating a jungle is exceptionally difficult. Even with the right equipment, even knowing what you're doing, the travel is so slow. Cutting through the growth on the ground, there's animals to contend with, even though it's incredibly moist, there's lots of moisture in a jungle, the water oftentimes can't be drank. So the risk of dehydration is really high. The jungle that they were in was incredibly mountainous. And so in addition to just navigating a jungle, you're dealing with pretty significant elevation changes. I mean, it is a treacherous place to be navigating, absolutely treacherous. And for them to have moved 5 miles through dense jungle it's incredible. That is almost unbelievable. But nonetheless, their backpack is found, 5 miles away. In addition, the woman who found the backpack, she was a local woman, and she said, I'm out in this area a fair amount, and I've not seen this backpack. I saw it today, and I picked it up and reported it. But it just means that the backpack probably had not been sitting there for very long. It had been probably placed there within the past couple of days, let's say, which doesn't really provide that much clarity, but it adds to the kind of intrigue around what actually happened. So the backpack was in great condition, and everything inside the backpack was very neatly kind of placed. It looked like someone had very intentionally placed everything in the bag, zipped it up neatly, and put it down by the riverside to be found. It didn't have the look and feel of a backpack belonging to 2 missing people in the Panamanian jungle that's been missing for the past 3 months. It looked like it had just been grabbed off a shelf, put some stuff in it, and put down. But either way, inside there was, their sunglasses, there was a water bottle, there was some underwear that was in there, and their digital camera was in there, which is going to be really important. And both of their phones were in there, another really important part of this investigation. So when the initial search was conducted, it was done with a focus on the volcano area, because that's the last place the girls had been, at least as far as everybody understood. But now that they found this backpack 5 miles away, they had a new area to search. And so they start searching around the area around the backpack, and they quickly find some of the girls' clothing neatly folded on the side of a river, but no sign of the girls. And then another 2 months go by, And they finally locate, in the same rough area that the clothes and the backpack were found, they actually discover some of the remains of the girls. That DNA confirms it was them. But it's the state that the remains were found in, and some of the other things that were found in conjunction with these remains that raise a lot of questions. So of the remains that were found, DNA proved that some of them were Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. DNA also showed that mixed in with some of the bone fragments and pieces of remains that were found were at least 3 other people's remains. So we're talking about 5 people's remains in the same area. Also, interestingly, scientists were able to look at the bones, and there were no scratches on the bones. So that's important if you think about it, because their bones were found all over the place. They had been, broken apart, right? Well, if an animal had been responsible, there would have been scratches all over the bones because they would have broken the bones that way. Without those scratches, the only other way it could happen is if they've basically been pulverized, basically broken with like blunt force. So obviously something horrible has happened to these 2 girls, but their remains really only show investigators that the women had died. It doesn't show how they died or really anything. And so investigators needed to look at the other evidence to try to get a better sense of what actually happened. And so they look at the phone records, and they can tell that on April 1st, when they started this hike initially, there is a string of distress calls that are sent within like an hour of the hike starting. So whatever happened to these girls happened almost immediately on their hike. None of those calls connect. Over the course of those first 4 days, as they're trying to reach help via their cell phone, nothing's connecting, and then Froon's phone dies. Kremers' phone does not, and they or she begin turning it off and then turning it on sporadically to try to get reception. On April 6th, something interesting starts to happen. Somebody was trying to access Kremers' phone. There was multiple failed login attempts, and it got to the point where you weren't even allowed to input any more codes. It was just like locked, the phone locked. So somebody was unable to get into the phone. From April 7th to April 10th, there were 77 calls attempted, distress calls attempted. And then on April 11th, the phone died, and that was it. So in addition to the phone, they started looking at the camera. And so when you look at all the pictures they took, the beginning of the camera roll is this wonderful, montage of these 2 girls having this great time hiking up this volcano. And then as night begins to fall, you can tell that their expressions begin to change a little bit. It looks like you could begin to see that maybe something was wrong. Perhaps they're lost. We don't really know. But then there's no more pictures taken until April 8th. Over 90 pictures are taken between April 8th and April 10th, which is that period of time where all those distress calls were made on Kremers' phone before Kremers' phone finally died. The pictures are very strange. There's a lot of theories about why they took the pictures they did, but in a nutshell, the pictures, none of them include pictures of the girls, with the exception of one, which is the back of Kremers' head, and it appears to be bleeding. The rest are shots of the landscape, and they're all taken in total darkness. So they're in the middle of the jungle in total darkness taking these pictures. There was one picture that looked like whatever gear they had been kind of lined up on a rock, and someone had taken a picture of it. There were pictures of candy wrappers, and there also was a picture that was like looking down into a ravine that perhaps was a picture of one of the girls down in the ravine. So it's unclear who's taking the pictures. It could be the girls, could be one of the girls, could be a third party, we don't know. And then there's a ton of speculation about one picture in particular. So picture 509, as it's been dubbed, because that was the number on the camera roll, was deleted from the camera. Now, that in and of itself is not particularly strange. It's not crazy to think that these girls might have deleted a picture, right? I mean, maybe they accidentally snapshot something and they just deleted it. But it was permanently deleted, right? So if you hit delete on a digital camera, it's deleted. But a professional with the right software could reconstruct that image if they plugged it into a computer. Now, in order to permanently remove it from your camera, the girls would have had to connect it to a laptop, to a computer, and wipe it that way. They didn't have access to a computer. So at most, they might have hit delete, but it still would have had that kind of archived, almost ghost image that a professional investigator could have reconstructed. But when they went to do that with this deleted image, it was wiped for good. So someone had managed to professionally wipe one picture. It was the last picture on the camera roll. So the pervading theory here is that these girls got lost and fell to their death. But to me, that's totally unsatisfactory. I believe they were murdered. And I think it's because there's just too many things indicating that foul play was involved. How did they go 5 miles across incredibly rugged terrain that even amongst Navy SEALs, that would be a very difficult distance to cover, even with all the right equipment? How did they, without the right equipment, not knowing the area, without a guide, without even flashlights, how did they do that? And then let's just assume they managed to go the 5 miles, okay? They fall to their death. Why are their remains, 1, incomplete, and 2, scattered and mixed in with other people's remains? Why were Kremer's bones bleached? And why weren't there scratch marks on the bones? I mean, you would think that in order for if they've fallen off this cliff, let's say, in order for their remains to be scattered all over the place and be dismembered, that an animal would have to be involved if there's no foul play involved. And there's no scratch marks on the bones, so an animal couldn't have done it. So there's lots of questions that go unanswered. And then if you look at those pictures again, it seems an awful lot like somebody else was taking those pictures. Somebody was trying to access Kremer's phone towards the end there, and someone looks like they were using their camera as well. And then, you know, the backpack that was found, it just seems like it was kind of staged. But then again, like, to what end? Why were they giving away the camera and the phone, which kind of led them to thinking probably this is foul play? Why would they have placed the backpack? That doesn't really exonerate anybody. It actually just adds more questions about the case. So the whole thing is just very confusing, but the narrative that they simply got lost and fell, to me, seems like the most far-fetched thing out of all the theories. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. I'll be doing these at least once a week.